Okay. So today we're going to kind of dive into a leadership concept that I bet you've seen before.
Mm.
We're calling it the genius with 1,000 helpers. And, it's that central visionary leader just bursting with ideas and surrounded by all these capable people, working hard
Yeah,
to make the vision a reality. You've seen this, right?
absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a model with a certain allure to it, isn't there? I mean, the single brilliant person at the helm,
Yeah.
guiding the whole organization
Yeah.
is powerful. And I think, if you think about business or other fields, you can conjure up all sorts of examples
Oh, yeah.
of those seemingly indispensable leaders driving everything.
Yeah. And when you talk about that, I always think about Henry Singleton at Teledyne.
Oh, yeah.
The Sphinx, really the intellectual engine behind this sprawling company.
Right.
And even the name Teledyne, right? Force applied at a distance.
Right.
It kind of gives you that sense of like the central control that he had over these
Right.
widespread operations. What strikes you about that example?
Well, I think what's fascinating about Singleton is, this real sense of the rugged individualist, I think,
Yeah.
built into his ambition, right?
Yeah.
His journey culminating in, a PhD from MIT,
Mm-hmm.
really underscores, I think, this belief in his own intellectual horsepower.
Yeah.
As the primary driver.
Yeah.
Founding Teledyne, I think, feels like, the ultimate expression of that.
Yeah.
That personal drive and vision,
Yeah.
it makes you wonder to what extent, that vision was, truly shared or distributed within the company.
Right. Right. And this isn't just a relic of business history either.
Right.
This genius with 1,000 helpers, it seems to show up a lot when you look at companies that ultimately didn't succeed long term.
Yeah.
And that's kind of a pattern that emerges when you compare them to companies that really stood the test of time. Have you noticed that pattern?
Absolutely. And, I think that brings us to a really critical point here, right? I mean, while this model might seem, really effective
Right.
in the short run, especially when that genius is, actively leading the charge,
Mm-hmm.
it introduces a pretty significant vulnerability, right?
Yeah.
What happens when that key individual
Right.
moves on?
That's the central question.
It is.
Because it really does create this potential breaking point for the whole organization.
Right.
If the strategy and direction are so closely tied to one person's thinking,
Mm-hmm.
the company can just be completely adrift when they're gone. It makes you think about the resilience of the whole structure, right?
Absolutely. And it really begs a fundamental question, about leadership in general. Is lasting success, truly built on this singular brilliance of an individual? Or is there a more, dispersed, team-oriented approach that ultimately proves to be more robust and adaptable over the long haul?
Well, intuitively, it seems like relying too heavily on one person is always risky.
Yeah.
But let's dig into this contrast a little bit.
Yeah.
We've got this picture of the genius with 1,000 helpers, very top-down structure, where the leader sets the course and then the team follows and executes.
Yep.
Sounds efficient, but what are some of the real limitations?
Well, I think one of the core limitations is exactly what we've been talking about, right? I mean, that over-reliance on that one individual. So when that genius departs, for whatever reason, the organization can really struggle to maintain its direction, right? The deep understanding, the tacit knowledge, the essence of that vision, might not have been effectively, disseminated or internalized throughout the company and the helpers.
Right.
Well, competent in their roles, they've been primarily focused on, executing someone else's vision rather than developing, their own strategic thinking or contributing to that broader direction.
Oh, yeah.
You've seen that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it is often really jarring.
Yeah.
It's like a machine
Right.
built around this one irreplaceable part. And, if that part malfunctions or is removed, the whole thing can just grind to a halt or at least operate at, a much lower level.
That's right.
And you do see examples of leaders who had a tremendous impact, but whose companies really faltered after they left.
Yeah.
There wasn't a deep bench or a widely shared sense of purpose to carry things forward.
That's right. And what's really illuminating here is that contrast with what we see in organizations that achieve really enduring success, right? I mean, the emphasis isn't on having that singular genius at the top,
right,
who then assembles, a team to implement their ideas.
Right.
But it's on something fundamentally different.
Yeah.
Something that might even seem counterintuitive at first.
Yeah. And that difference is really that who comes before what.
Yeah.
It's about getting the right people on the bus and getting the wrong people off the bus.
Right.
Before you even know where the bus is going.
Yeah. It completely flips, the genius with 1,000 helpers model on its head.
Right.
Instead of the brilliant leader charting the course and finding people to help navigate, the really consistently successful organizations, they prioritize building an exceptional team first.
Yeah.
And the vision, the strategy, often emerges from the collective strengths,
right,
the talents, and even the debates within that high caliber team.
Right.
And it's much more collaborative and arguably a much more resilient approach.
So it's not just finding people who can follow directions or execute a plan, but it's assembling this group of talented, driven individuals who can shape vision and strategy themselves.
Yeah.
The leader acts less like a solo visionary and more like a facilitator.
Yeah.
Harnessing the intelligence and passion of the whole team.
Absolutely. And, the genius with 1,000 helpers often operates with a really, strong conviction in their own vision. And they see their primary task as, clearly and effectively communicating that vision downwards.
Right.
Whereas the leaders and organizations built for sustained success, they seem to prioritize, listening intently, learning from their team members at all levels, and really fostering this shared understanding of, the company's potential and the best path forward.
Right. And this brings up this interesting point about ego, too, because the genius model can be so closely tied to a leader who's got, a larger-than-life personality and a real need for recognition. How do you think that kind of ego impacts their ability to build a collaborative organization?
It's huge.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, when a leader's ego becomes too central, it can inadvertently stifle the growth and development of others within the organization.
Right.
There might be reluctance to empower team members fully.
Yeah.
A hesitation to truly share the spotlight, which ultimately limits the organization's, overall capacity and resilience when that leader eventually, steps away.
Yeah. Have you seen how a leader's personality really affects team dynamics?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, time and time again, it really does shape, the performance and the trajectory.
I've seen situations where a strong, charismatic leader can drive, initially great results, but that very dominance prevents other people from stepping up and developing their own leadership skills.
Right.
They stay in a supporting role forever without a chance to grow into more strategic positions.
Yeah, and it creates a real vacuum when the original leader departs.
Right, exactly. And that brings us back to that fragility that we talked about before.
Right.
Because the genius with 1,000 helpers is fundamentally a top-down approach. It relies on the intellectual capital and individual drive of one person.
Yeah.
Sustained success, it seems, is rooted in a much more distributed form of leadership where the collective strength of the team propels the organization forward.
That's right.
Regardless of who's at the top.
Yeah.
And that's the big shift. It's not about the brilliance of one, it's about the capability and commitment of many.
Exactly.
So just to kind of bring it all together, we've explored this genius with 1,000 helpers model, that central visionary leader setting the direction, the team of capable people executing the vision.
Yeah.
We talked about Henry Singleton and Teledyne, as an example of that.
Right.
But we contrasted that with the principles in companies that achieve that sustained success, where the priority is getting the right people in place first.
Yeah. Who before what?
Who before the what? It's a fundamental difference in approach.
Absolutely.
The leaders who build these truly great lasting organizations, they prioritize building that strong, capable team first as the foundation before they even figure out the course.
That's right.
And that's a contrast to the comparison companies that lean so heavily on that one leader.
That's right.
And their helpers.
Yeah. The genius with 1,000 helpers really embodies that style, where ideas and direction flow primarily from the top.
Yes, and the evidence really suggests that for that sustained success, the bedrock is the strength.
Right.
And the collective capability of the whole team.
It really is.
It's the difference between, a top-down command structure that's so dependent on one person's brilliance.
Right.
Versus this more distributed, resilient model where, shared talent.
Right. Diverse perspectives and a collective commitment are really driving those results that last.
Yeah, that endures.
So think about the leadership models you've seen in your own life.
Yeah.
Have you seen this genius with 1,000 helpers in action? What happened when that genius moved on?
Yeah.
How did the organization adapt, or did it struggle?
That's right.
And contrast that with, teams or organizations where the focus was on building the right group from the start.
Mm-hmm.
How did those teams evolve?
Yeah.
What kind of resilience did they show when faced with, challenges?
Right.
It's a fascinating comparison, and I think it gives us a lot of insight into these very different paths to success.
Absolutely.
Thanks for listening.